Celeste Rearden was 36 years old, and she had spent exactly 12 of those years making sure Aaron Rearden never had a reason to look anywhere else. She ran a boutique event planning firm out of a converted brownstone on the west side of Atlanta, a business she had grown from a folding table in their second bedroom and one used laptop into a company that staffed 6 full-time employees and handled some of the most talked-about social events in the city. She was the kind of woman people noticed when she walked into a room, not because she demanded attention, but because she moved through the world with the quiet confidence of someone who had built everything she owned with her own 2 hands. 12 years, that was what the anniversary party was celebrating. Their house on Briarwood Lane sat at the end of a tree-lined street, a 4-bedroom brick colonial that Aaron had surprised her with on their 7th anniversary. She remembered standing in the driveway that morning, hands over her mouth, keys pressed into her palm, tears she hadn't expected running down her face. He had been standing behind her, his hands on her shoulders, his voice low and warm against her ear. "You built this with me," he had said. "This is yours." That morning, with the late September light falling across the freshly cut lawn and caterers already moving through the house arranging centerpieces she had designed herself, Celeste stood in her kitchen holding a coffee mug and letting herself feel proud. Not the loud, performed kind of pride. The quiet, earned kind. The kind that lives in the chest and asks nothing of anyone. The guest list was 120 people. Family, close friends, colleagues who had become family over the years. Celeste's best friend and business partner, Diane Rhodes, had insisted on handling all the party logistics personally as her anniversary gift. "You plan everyone else's moments," Diane had told her 2 weeks ago, squeezing her hand across the planning table. "Let somebody plan yours for once." Aaron had left early that morning for a meeting. He was a senior architect at Whitmore and Crane, a firm that had promoted him twice in 5 years. He was brilliant at what he did. She had always loved that about him, the way his mind worked through problems spatially, the way he could look at a blank lot and describe the building that belonged there as though it already existed. They had met in graduate school at Georgia Tech, 2 serious students who fell into something slow and real and lasting. Their first date had been coffee that turned into a 6-hour conversation that neither of them wanted to end. He had walked her to her car at midnight, rain beginning to fall, and instead of kissing her, he had simply said, "I would really like to do this again." She had driven home smiling in a way she didn't fully understand yet. 12 years later, standing in the kitchen they had redesigned together, in the house he had surprised her with, surrounded by a life that felt solid and chosen, Celeste allowed herself 1 full minute of complete happiness. She set down her coffee. She had centerpieces to approve and a dress to get into. She did not know that in 4 hours, in front of everyone she loved, everything she had built her happiness on would require a second, very different kind of building. Aaron came home at 2 in the afternoon, dressed well, carrying the easy warmth he always carried when he had a good meeting. He kissed her cheek at the kitchen counter, stole a piece of the cheese board Diane had assembled, and told her she looked beautiful before she had even finished putting her earrings in. "Nervous?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe of their bedroom, watching her at the vanity mirror. "No," she said and meant it. "Happy." He smiled at that, the same smile he had at 24, slightly crooked on the left side, the kind of smile that had always made her feel chosen. She caught it in the mirror and felt something warm move through her chest. Their daughter, Imani, 13 years old and already carrying herself with the quiet seriousness her mother had passed down to her like an heirloom, appeared in the doorway beside Aaron. She was wearing the burgundy dress they had picked out together and looking at both of her parents with that particular teenage expression that was equal parts affection and embarrassment. "You both look nice," she said, in the tone of someone granting a high compliment. Celeste laughed. Aaron pulled Imani into a side hug she pretended to resist and didn't. That image, the 3 of them reflected in the vanity mirror, warm and whole, would stay with Celeste for a long time afterward. She would think of it often in the weeks that followed, the last photograph her memory took before everything changed. By 5 o'clock, the house was transformed. Diane had done extraordinary work. The backyard was strung with warm globe lights that turned the September evening golden. Tables dressed in ivory linen held low arrangements of burgundy and blush florals. A small stage had been set up near the garden wall, where a four-piece ensemble was playing easy jazz as guests arrived. Celeste moved through the gathering the way she always moved through events she had poured herself into, present in every corner, aware of every detail, making sure every person felt seen. She greeted her mother-in-law, Beverly Rearden, a small, sharp-eyed woman who had never fully decided what to make of Celeste, but who held her tonight in a longer hug than usual and said quietly, "He is lucky. He knows it." Celeste smiled and accepted the words at full value. There was no reason not to. She looked for Aaron and found him across the yard, deep in conversation with his colleague Damon and two other men she recognized from the firm. He glanced over, found her eyes, and raised his glass slightly. A small private gesture that had been theirs for years. She raised hers back. Everything was exactly as it should be. She did not yet know what his phone screen said. She did not yet know the name attached to the message he would receive 40 minutes later. She was still, in those early golden hours of the evening, simply a woman at her own anniversary party, surrounded by the life she had built, in love with the man she had built it with. That version of the evening would not survive the night. It happened the way most life-changing moments happen, quietly, without announcement, in a space between one ordinary second and the next. Celeste had stepped inside to refill the charcuterie board, moving quickly through the kitchen because she could hear Diane's voice beginning the first round of toasts outside, and she wanted to be back before Aaron was called up to speak. She grabbed the tray from the counter and turned toward the back door. Aaron was standing near the kitchen island, back half-turned to her, head bent over his phone. The screen was bright in the dim kitchen light. He was reading something with the focused stillness of a person receiving information that required complete attention. Then he typed, 4 words, maybe 5, and a slow smile crossed his face. Not the crooked smile she loved. This one was different, private, the kind reserved for something a person keeps separate from everything else in their life. Celeste's feet stopped moving. She was close enough to see the name at the top of the message thread before he tilted the phone and slipped it into his pocket. 2 syllables, a woman's name, Renata. Aaron turned and found her standing there. Something moved across his face so quickly it was almost invisible. Then the warmth slid back into place like a mask settling. "Hey," he said easily, "you need help with that." "I've got it," she said. Her voice came out level, steady. She did not know how, but it did. She walked past him and out the back door, set the tray on the table, smiled at something Diane said, accepted a fresh glass from a passing server. From the outside, she was completely unchanged. A woman at her own party, composed, gracious, present. Inside, she was conducting a rapid and merciless inventory. She pulled out her own phone under the table, opened the shared family calendar they had kept since Imani was born. Her eyes moved through the past 6 weeks with a precision born of 12 years of learning to read the architecture of their shared life. 3 Thursday evenings logged as late client reviews. 2 Saturday mornings marked as site visits. A weekend conference in Savannah 3 weeks ago that she had encouraged him to attend alone because she had a large event that same weekend. She had encouraged him to go. The thought settled somewhere cold and low. She set her phone face down on the table. Above her, the globe lights glowed warm and steady in the September evening. The jazz ensemble moved into something slow and sweet around her. 120 people who loved her and Aaron were eating and laughing and raising glasses to 12 years of what they believed was a solid, real, lasting love. Celeste picked up her glass. She took a slow sip. She did not cry. She was not, at that moment, a woman who had been broken. She was a woman who had just received information. And she had learned a long time ago that what you do with information matters far more than how it makes you feel in the first 60 seconds. The microphone was 20 feet away, on the small stage near the garden wall. She looked at it. She looked away. Not yet. Celeste excused herself from the table with a smile and a quiet word to Diane about checking on the dessert timing. It was a normal thing to say. It raised no flags. Inside, she went straight to her home office and closed the door. She sat in the chair behind her desk, the same chair she sat in when she was working through complex logistics for a client's event, when she needed to think clearly without distraction. She placed her hands flat on the desk. She gave herself 3 minutes, not to fall apart, to think. Aaron's phone was on a shared plan. Had been since year 2 of their marriage when she had added him to hers because it made financial sense. She opened the carrier app on her phone, the same one she had used twice before to check Amani's screen time. She navigated to the account logs. What she found did not require interpretation. A number she didn't recognize appeared in Aaron's call and message history going back 4 months. The frequency was not sporadic or occasional. It was consistent and deliberate. Weekday evenings, weekend afternoons, the Savannah Conference weekend, where multiple calls clustered together like a conversation that had nowhere else to be hidden. 4 months. She closed the app. She sat with that number the way you sit with something that cannot be unsaid once it has been spoken aloud. 4 months meant the summer. The summer they had taken Amani to the Outer Banks for 2 weeks, the trip where Aaron had seemed fully present, fully himself, laughing at dinner and reading on the beach and reaching for her hand on the evening walks they took after Amani went to sleep. That summer, he had been carrying this through all of it. A knock came at the office door. Gentle 2 taps, Diane's specific knock. "Cel, we are about 10 minutes from the main toast. You okay?" Celeste looked at her reflection in the dark computer screen. The woman looking back at her had her makeup perfectly intact. Her expression was composed. Her back was straight. "I am perfect," she said. "I will be right out." She heard Diane's footsteps move away. She opened her desk drawer and removed the small notebook she kept for event logistics, the one where she tracked timelines and vendor notes. She turned to a clean page. She wrote down the number from the call logs. She wrote down 4 months. She wrote down the name Renata, exactly as she had seen it on his screen. Then she closed the notebook, placed it in her clutch, and stood up. There was one more thing she needed to do before she walked back out there. She needed to understand the full scope of what she was dealing with, because she was not a woman who reacted to partial information. She had built her entire career on the principle that you did not walk into an event unprepared for what might happen. You anticipated. You planned. You knew your room. She called her college friend Petra Walsh, who worked in family law on the north side of Atlanta. Petra answered on the second ring, her voice carrying the particular alertness of someone who recognized that a friend calling in the middle of a social event was not calling about nothing. "I need to ask you something quick," Celeste said, "and I need you to just answer. What does a spouse need to document if they are building a record of marital misconduct?" A short silence. "Everything," Petra said. "Dates, times, documented evidence, financial irregularities if any exist, witnesses where possible. You preserve before you confront." "Thank you," Celeste said. "Celeste," Petra said carefully. "I am fine," she said. "I will call you tomorrow." She ended the call. She smoothed her dress. She picked up her clutch. When she walked back into the anniversary party, Aaron was near the stage talking to her father, both of them laughing at something. She watched him for a moment from the door. He looked like her husband. He looked like the man she had loved for 12 years. He looked like someone who had no idea that the ground he was standing on had just fundamentally changed. She crossed the yard toward the bar. She needed something sparkling in her hand for what came next. The microphone was still on the stand near the garden wall, waiting. Diane gathered the room at 7:30 with the practiced ease of a woman who had spent 20 years attending and co-producing Celeste's events and had absorbed every technique by proximity. "All right, everybody," Diane called out, her voice carrying the warm authority of someone the room already trusted. "We are going to take a few minutes to celebrate these two properly, because 12 years of genuine love deserves more than a quick clink and a photo." Laughter from the assembled crowd. Someone near the back started a slow clap that was picked up briefly and then settled back into warm chatter. Celeste stood at Aaron's side. His hand found the small of her back, a gesture so practiced and natural she almost felt its weight as love before she remembered what she now knew. She smiled into the gathered faces of her family and friends. Her mother, Gloria Hayward, was seated at the table closest to the stage, dressed in a deep plum that set off her silver locks. She was watching Celeste the way mothers watch their daughters at moments of public happiness, with a particular attentiveness that comes from knowing your child more completely than anyone else in the room. Something in her mother's expression was careful, quiet, watching. Celeste held her gaze a beat longer than usual. Gloria gave the smallest, steadiest nod, the kind that said, "I see you, whatever you need." Diane began her toast with a story from their early years, a catering mix-up at a small party Celeste had planned the year she started the business. A story everyone at the front tables had heard before, but laughed at again, because Diane told it with the timing of someone who understood that the best stories improve with age. Aaron laughed beside her, and the sound of it landed differently now than it had that morning. His colleague Damon followed Diane with a brief, warm tribute about Aaron as a professional and as a man. Celeste listened with the surface of her attention, while the deeper part of her mind remained steady and working. The way she managed complex events when 3 things were happening at once, and all of them required her presence. Then came the moment she had known was coming. Diane held the microphone out toward Aaron. He took it with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own life. He looked out at the gathered room. He found Celeste's eyes. 12 years ago, he began, his voice warm and full. I was sitting in a library at 2 in the morning stressing over a structural engineering exam when a woman sat down across from me and asked if I had a spare highlighter. A ripple of warmth through the crowd. Celeste remembered the moment exactly. The yellow highlighter, the way he had handed it to her without looking up, and then looked up. I have spent the last 12 years being grateful that I kept extra supplies. The room responded. Her mother laughed. Imani, seated beside her grandmother, looked simultaneously proud and mortified in the way only a 13-year-old can manage. Aaron spoke for another 2 minutes, measured and genuine, hitting every note a loving husband hits at an anniversary party. Every sentence landed true. That was perhaps the most complicated part. Not that it sounded rehearsed or hollow, but that it sounded completely real. He finished. The room lifted glasses. Someone called out a warm cheer from the back that broke the sentiment into easy celebration. Aaron kissed her cheek and handed the microphone back toward Diane. And Celeste touched Diane's arm, gently, deliberately. I would like to say something, she said. Diane looked at her. Something in Celeste's eyes made Diane hold still for just a fraction of a second longer than she would have otherwise. Then she handed over the microphone. Celeste stepped to the center of the small stage. She looked out at 120 faces turned toward her. She held the microphone with the same steady grip she brought to every professional moment of her life. She began to speak. I want to thank all of you for being here tonight, Celeste began. Her voice was warm, measured, the voice of a woman who had spent 12 years giving toasts and moving through rooms full of people with grace. There was nothing in her tone that signaled what was coming. That was entirely deliberate. 12 years is a long time to build something with another person, she said. Most people do not really understand what that means until they are inside it. The small choices, the daily ones, the choice to come home, the choice to be honest, the choice to protect what you are building even when it would be easier not to. A few heads nodded. Her father, Joseph Hayward, a quiet man of 63 who had been married to Gloria for 38 years, watched her from the left side of the yard with an expression that was beginning to shift from warm to alert. Aaron talked about the highlighter, Celeste continued, a small smile touching her lips. I want to talk about something else. I want to talk about what I have learned about love in 12 years because I think it matters, especially tonight. She paused, let the pause sit. I learned that love is not just a feeling, she said. It is a practice. It is something you either do every single day or you quietly stop doing. And the hard thing, the thing nobody warns you about, is that sometimes you are practicing it with everything you have while the other person has already stopped. The yard had gone very still. Not the stillness of an audience waiting for a punchline, a deeper stillness. The kind that settles when a room collectively senses that what it is witnessing is no longer a toast. Erin was standing 6 feet to her right. She did not look at him yet. "Earlier this evening," she said, her voice remaining steady and clear, "I saw my husband's phone screen in our kitchen. I saw a name. And I recognized the expression on his face when he read that message, because it is not an expression he has ever made for me." The yard went from still to silent. Completely, absolutely silent. "I want to be very careful about what I say here," she continued, "because there are people in this yard who love us both and who deserve the truth and not a performance. So I will simply say this. I looked at our phone records tonight. There is a 4-month conversation with a woman named Renata that does not belong in our marriage. I have the dates. I have the times. I have the documentation." She looked at Erin now. He was standing with his glass at his side, his face a landscape she could not fully read. The warmth had drained from it. What was left was something more complicated than guilt, more complicated than anger. Something closer to a man realizing that the ground he thought he controlled had been managed by someone else entirely. "I did not plan to say this tonight," Celeste said, "but I am a woman who has always believed that truth is a foundation, and you cannot build anything lasting on top of something that is cracked underneath. So." She took one breath. "To 12 years," she said, and lifted her glass. The room did not respond with a collective lift. It remained in the suspended silence of 120 people who had just witnessed something they would spend years thinking about. Celeste set the microphone down on the stand beside her. She stepped off the stage. She walked directly to her mother's table, pulled out the empty chair beside Gloria, and sat down. Her mother's hand found hers immediately under the tablecloth, warm, firm, saying nothing that needed to be said aloud. From across the yard, she heard Erin say her name. Once, quietly, the way a person says a name when the full weight of their choices has just arrived all at once. She did not turn around. The first person to move was Beverly Rearden. Erin's mother crossed the yard with the determined speed of a woman who had spent 61 years solving problems by inserting herself into the center of them. Her face was set in the particular expression she reserved for moments she had decided required her management. "Now everybody just settle down," Beverly began, her voice loud enough to reach the outer tables. "This is a misunderstanding. Whatever Celeste thinks she saw on that phone, I know my son and I know." "Beverly." The voice came from Joseph Hayward, Celeste's father. He had risen from his seat at the left side of the yard, and the single word he had spoken carried a weight that stopped Beverly Rearden mid-step. Joseph Hayward was not a loud man. He had never needed to be. In 38 years, Celeste had watched her father make his points through economy of language and the quiet authority of a man who measured every word before spending it. "This is not your moment," he said. "Let your son speak for himself." Beverly opened her mouth, closed it. The room watched her make the calculation and lose it. She stepped back. All eyes moved to Erin. He stood in the same place he had been when Celeste stepped off the stage, glass still in his hand, but his posture had changed. The ease was gone. What remained was the posture of a man carrying something heavy and having run out of places to set it down. Diane was standing near the bar, arms folded, her face holding the particular expression of a woman who had privately suspected something for longer than she had allowed herself to admit, and who was now feeling the specific mixture of being right about something she had desperately wanted to be wrong about. Imani had not moved from her chair beside her grandmother. She was 13 and old enough to understand most of what had just happened and young enough to still look to her mother's face to understand how she was supposed to feel about it. Celeste caught her daughter's eyes from across the yard and held them for a long, steady moment. She kept her expression calm, not cold, not performed, simply present and unbroken. Imani's chin lifted slightly, following her mother's lead the way she always had. Erin set his glass on the nearest table. He walked toward Celeste. The crowd parted for him without being asked, the unconscious movement of people who recognize that a private moment has been made unavoidably public. He stopped in front of her. His voice, when he spoke, was low enough for the nearest tables to hear but not carry to the edges of the yard. "Celeste," he said, "I need you to come inside with me." She looked up at him from her seat. She did not stand. "I do not think so," she said. Not with heat, not with performance. Simply as a woman who had spent the last 2 hours deciding exactly what she would and would not do, and was now executing that decision with the same composure she brought to every difficult moment in her professional life. Something moved across Aaron's face. Not anger, something closer to devastation. Because he had known this woman for 12 years. He knew that tone. He knew what it meant when her voice was that steady and her eyes were that clear. It meant she had already finished something he did not even know had started. "We should talk," he said. "We will," she said, "but not tonight." She turned to her mother. "I would like some of that coconut cake," she said. Gloria Hayward reached for the dessert without a word, her hands steady, her eyes bright with the specific pride of a mother watching her daughter handle the hardest moment of her adult life, with more grace than anyone in that yard had expected or deserved to witness. The guests left in measured waves over the next hour. There were no dramatic exits, no shouted confrontations, no scenes that required anyone to step in. The evening ended the way a fire ends when the oxygen is quietly removed, not with violence, but with a slow, inevitable settling into quiet. Diane stayed until the last vendor truck pulled out of the driveway. She moved through the cleanup with the focused efficiency of a woman who needed her hands occupied, directing the catering staff and folding linen, and never once asking Celeste anything she was not ready to answer. That was the gift of 20 years of real friendship. Diane understood the difference between support and interrogation. Beverly Rearden left with 2 of Aaron's cousins. She said nothing to Celeste directly, but at the door she paused and looked back with an expression that had lost most of its earlier force. What remained was something smaller and older. The look of a mother beginning the slow, difficult work of understanding that protecting her son and excusing him were not the same thing. Aaron's colleague Damon shook Celeste's hand on his way out, an oddly formal gesture that carried more genuine respect than most long conversations do. "I am sorry," he said simply, and she believed every word of it. Gloria and Joseph were the last of the family to leave. Her father held her for a long time in the driveway, his hand firm on the back of her head the way he had held her when she was small. The way that said without any words that some things do not change regardless of what else does. Her mother kissed her cheek and whispered, "Call me when you wake up. I will be there before your coffee finishes brewing." Imani was asleep by 10. Celeste checked on her at 10:15, standing in the doorway of her daughter's room, watching the steady rise and fall of her breathing. In sleep, Imani looked younger than 13. Still carrying in her face some softness from early childhood that wakefulness had mostly replaced with the serious angles of who she was becoming. Celeste stood there for a long time. Whatever happened next, this was not negotiable. Whatever decisions got made in the days and weeks ahead, this child's sense of safety and steadiness was the fixed point that everything else would have to be arranged around. She had been clear about that from the moment she sat down in her office 2 hours ago and picked up the phone to call Petra. She closed Imani's door softly and walked downstairs. Aaron was in the living room. He had loosened his tie and was sitting on the couch with his elbows on his knees, hands clasped, staring at the floor in the way of a man who had been sitting with his thoughts, and found none of them offering anything useful. He looked up when she entered. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The living room held 12 years of accumulated life. The framed photographs from their travels lined the mantel. The bookshelves held both their libraries, mixed together in the organic disorder of 2 people who had long since stopped sorting what belonged to whom. The rug underfoot was the one they had argued mildly about in a Buckhead furniture store, and ultimately both agreed on. Every corner of the room was a small, unremarkable monument to a life built in common. "How long have you known?" Aaron asked. "I saw the phone tonight," she said. "I confirm the rest in my office." He closed his eyes briefly. "Celeste, I need you to tell me the truth," she said, not loudly, not with trembling, the way she asked for exactly what she needed and nothing more. Not the version that makes it smaller, the actual truth. How long? He looked at her for a long moment. The crooked smile was gone. Everything performed was gone. What remained was the man underneath all of it, stripped of ease and charm and the daily fluency of a comfortable life. 5 months, he said. She absorbed that. 5 months meant it had started in April. The month she had launched the biggest corporate account her company had ever signed. The month she had worked 18-hour days for 3 consecutive weeks and come home exhausted and proud, and had fallen asleep against his shoulder on the couch while they were watching television, and he had covered her with the blanket from the back of the armchair without waking her. That month. "Is it over?" she asked. He did not answer immediately. She recognized what that pause meant. "I see," she said. She set her clutch on the side table. She walked to the foot of the stairs. She paused without turning around. "There is a guest room made up," she said quietly. "I would like you to use it tonight." She climbed the stairs. She did not look back. Behind her, she heard nothing except the particular silence of a man who had run out of things to say that were worth the air they required. In the weeks that followed, Atlanta moved through October the way it always did. The heat broke slowly, giving way to mornings that carried the first real edge of autumn and evenings that felt generous and golden in the way of a city that knew how to make the most of its seasons. Celeste moved through those weeks with the same deliberate steadiness she had brought to every other hard thing in her adult life. She called Petra the morning after the party. She retained an attorney by the end of that week, not because divorce was certain, but because, as Petra had once told her in an entirely different context, you do not protect your interests after the crisis arrives. You protect them before it fully settles. She did not discuss the details with her employees. She did not perform grief at work or at church or at Manny's school events. She showed up to each of those places as herself, fully present, and let people see that she was standing. What she allowed was the private work of understanding what had actually happened, which was more complicated than she had expected. Not because she excused it. She did not. But because she was honest enough with herself to look at the full picture, including the parts where her own attention had been stretched thin across too many competing demands, where she had been present in the house, but not always fully present in the marriage. That did not make Aaron's choices right. It did not shift the responsibility onto shoulders where it did not belong. But she was not interested in a version of this story where she was only innocent and he was only a villain, because that version was too simple to be useful. And Celeste Rearden had never found much use in simple. Aaron had moved to a corporate apartment near his firm. He called every evening to speak with Manny. He was consistent about it, every single evening without exception. Whatever else he had failed at, he had not failed at that. She noted it without letting it soften anything else. Manny was, in the way of 13-year-olds who pay far more attention than any adult gives them credit for, processing everything in the careful, private way she processed most things. She did not ask her mother large questions. She asked small ones at unexpected moments, while they were folding laundry, while they were driving to school, while they sat at the kitchen table after dinner letting the evening quiet settle around them. Questions about love and whether it could be real if it ended. About whether people could change. About whether her mother was okay. To that last question, Celeste always gave the same answer. Yes, and I will keep being okay. She meant it more with each passing week. Diane appeared at her door every Saturday morning with coffee and said nothing that was not needed and everything that was. She was the kind of friend that most people spend their whole lives hopping to find. Celeste understood that clearly now and was grateful for it with the specific gratitude of someone who had seen enough of the world to know how rare it truly was. The conversation with Beverly Rearden happened 6 weeks after the anniversary party, in a small tea room near Beverly's neighborhood. It was not an easy conversation. Beverly arrived still carrying some of the defensiveness she had shown in the backyard, and Celeste let her carry it without argument. Somewhere in the middle of the second cup of tea, Beverly set down her spoon and looked at Celeste directly. "I did not know," she said. "I want you to know that I did not know." "I believe you," Celeste said. Beverly looked down at her cup. "I keep thinking about what I said in the yard, about it being a misunderstanding." She shook her head slowly. "That was wrong of me, I know that." "You were protecting your son," Celeste said. "I understand it." "You should have let me have it," Beverly said, almost to herself. "The way you just sat down and asked for cake." She looked up, something moving across her face that might have been the beginning of a new kind of respect. "I would have had some things to say." For the first time in 6 weeks, Celeste laughed. A real one, small and sudden. Beverly smiled at it, then pressed her lips together, then let the smile stay where it was. They finished their tea. November came in with the smell of wood smoke and dry leaves. Celeste arrived at her office on a Tuesday morning, earlier than anyone else, and stood at the window with her coffee watching the west side of the city wake itself up below her. The trees on the block had gone fully golden. A man walked a large dog along the opposite sidewalk. 2 teenagers in school uniforms moved past in animated conversation about something that required both of their hands to fully express. The world continued its ordinary business. On her desk sat a new client folder. A Buckhead family planning a 40th anniversary celebration for 200 guests in the spring. The irony of it was not lost on her. She had looked at the folder when it came in and sat with that irony for exactly as long as it deserved, which was about 30 seconds, and then she opened it and began making notes. This was what she had learned about herself in the 2 months that had passed, and it was perhaps the most useful thing the hardest season of her life had given her. She was not someone who was made smaller by difficulty. She was someone who, when required to rebuild, built better than she had the first time. Her business was stronger than it had been in September. She had signed 2 new accounts in October alone, partly because she had more hours to invest in the work, and partly because something in her approach had sharpened, the way any tool sharpens when it meets the right kind of resistance. The legal process was moving with the quiet efficiency that Petra had promised it would. There were no courtroom battles, no dramatic confrontations in hallways or parking lots. Documentation had been preserved. Terms were being negotiated. The house on Briarwood Lane was hers. Aaron had agreed to that without argument, which told her something about the kind of man he was underneath the choices he had made. A complicated man, not only a cruel one. She had not yet fully decided what the rest of her life looked like in its specific shape and detail. She was, for the first time in 12 years, not certain of her future. And she had discovered, carefully and a little to her own surprise, that she could hold that uncertainty without being undone by it. That not knowing was not the same thing as being lost. There was a knock at her office door. Diane entered, 2 coffee cups, one of which she set on Celeste's desk with the deliberate precision of someone completing a small, sacred ritual. "New inquiry came in last night," Diane said, pulling up her tablet. "A winter wedding. Small, maybe 80 guests. The client says she wants something quiet and genuinely beautiful and not like everything else she has ever attended." Celeste sat down. She pulled the folder toward her. "What is her timeline?" "February." "That is tight." "That is exactly why she needs us specifically," Diane said. Celeste smiled. She opened the folder. Outside, Atlanta was moving through another golden morning, untroubled and ongoing, the kind of city that had always understood that beauty and difficulty were not opposites, that they were, in fact, the same landscape seen from different heights. She thought briefly about the microphone, about the moment she had stepped onto that small stage in her own backyard with 120 witnesses and chosen truth over the comfortable fiction of a beautiful lie. She had not planned it far in advance. She had not written it out or rehearsed it in front of a mirror. She had simply reached the point where the weight of what she was carrying exceeded her willingness to carry it in silence, and she had set it down in the most honest way available to her. People still talked about it. She knew that. In their community, in the circles where family and church and professional life all overlapped, the story had moved the way true stories always move, carrying its own weight, needing no help from anyone. Several women had called her in the weeks following, not to discuss the details, but to say quietly that watching her that night had given them something they had been looking for without knowing its name. A model. A proof of what it looked like to stand in the hardest moment of your life without shrinking from it. She had listened to each of them. She had said what she genuinely believed, that the hardest part was not the public moment on the stage. The hardest part was the private one. The night before, sitting alone in her car at the end of the driveway because she needed a minute before going back inside. And the morning after, making Imani's breakfast with steady hands. And all the ordinary mornings that followed, where you had to choose, again and again, to be the fullest possible version of yourself, even when everything you had built with another person was being taken apart piece by piece. That part did not make a good clip. It did not fit neatly into one scene, but it was the only part that actually mattered. Imani came by the office after school on Tuesdays. She would arrive in approximately 4 hours, drop her backpack in the corner chair, help herself to something from the mixed nuts bowl on Diane's desk, and present her mother with a detailed account of everything unreasonable that had taken place at school that day. It was their Tuesday ritual. It had been since Imani was 9 years old. Celeste made a note in the new client folder. She picked up her coffee. She looked out at the golden Atlanta morning one more time and let herself feel the full, complicated, completely real weight of exactly where she was and exactly who she had become. Then she turned back to her desk. She had work to do, and she was, in every way that counted, exactly where she was supposed to be.